Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson, and with us tonight we have James Root and Mike Toto, who attend the vigils with us on Saturday morning at the foot of Main Street and South Street. We're going to talk tonight about health care, because we had some forums this past week, and we had a vigil, so to speak, at the Danbury Library. We're going to start with the one up at the Danbury Library. And James, tell us how that unfolded.
Sure, Dave. We had Wednesday night. We had a vigil or a little demonstration, a pro-healthcare bill demonstration at the library. It went very well. It was primarily organized by the Move On group, which is kind of an internet-based progressive group. But we had all kinds of people show up, many different kinds. Yes. It wasn't just Move On. All kinds of people from all different walks of life in Danbury. And this started at 6:30 and I guess went till 9, right?
About 8:30 is when they quit. Yeah. But it was about 75 people we had there with all kinds of signs and candles and flashlights, and got a permit. Okay, as you need to do with anybody over 25. It was a little mix-up because the permit said that we should be on the library grounds, and then when we all arrived, we were told by a police lieutenant that we had to really stay on the sidewalk, which we did. A lot of honks from people, from cars passing by and people passing by. So a fun time was had by all. We got our point across, and that was the whole thing, is to try to petition our government. It was a demonstration, to petition our government and to petition our fellow citizens to, hey, we need health care reform and the public option. And that's what Move On was pushing, was the public option.
Now, as I understand it, from what I've heard, was that there were predominantly pro-health care reform people there. But you had mentioned that there were 3 young men there that were were opposed to it, and there was, after a little bit of anxiety, let's say, there was some good discussion between between you and them, and we have talked about asking them, reaching out to them, and having them come to the show, because they were very knowledgeable, albeit on a different side of the issue. They were very knowledgeable about what they spoke of, and seemed like they'd be make good conversation here on this show and another show. But tell us a little bit about that.
David, to be honest with you, I did not speak to them. Unfortunately, there were 2 that came initially, and one spoke very well. The other younger guy, the younger gentleman, and I'm saying 12, 13, something like that, where the older gentleman probably was 15 or 16, they were both dressed very nicely. Unfortunately, the younger fellow had a caricature of Obama with a Hitler mustache, and that sort of turned me off. But anyway, spoke. They did speak the normal, or I should say the typical platitudes that are now bandied about, and unfortunately that sort of turned me off. But there were other people who engaged in conversation with them, and from what I understand, the older gentleman spoke very well, and he would be somebody that we should have on the show or invite to speak on an adult, even though he was a little young, an adult level, about the subject of health care.
Excellent.
There were other demonstrations, as we all know, or forums.
Well, these were a response. Sorry to cut you off, Mike, but these were kind of a response. The news media has been covering very heavily the town hall meetings where certain people who are against or angry or scared of the health care reform bill have been speaking out and, frankly, making scenes and kind of getting the limelight. That's all their fault, so that's the media's fault. So I think a lot of the motivation behind getting together this Wednesday night vigil was to respond and show that there are other people who feel the same way, but it might not be as demonstrative typically about it, right?
Correct. As I understand it, Dave, you were in at the morning. Chris Murphy had a town hall meeting, if you want to call it. I guess it was out in the green. Was it on the green?
2 mornings in a row.
Okay.
And
why don't we tell us about it?
Well, I'm feeling, as we talk about, you mentioned about we're trying to keep the rhetoric down and talk about the facts. I almost feel like we are, in a sense, we are the silent majority in this discussion. We're the ones that aren't yelling and screaming. We're the ones that are talking more rationally. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to show this, because this is what I have brought along to show at the to show people when they misbehave. And there has been a lot of that, as we've seen on television. And it says, America needs a cure for relentless screaming syndrome. Yes, it's a takeoff on restless leg syndrome. But okay, good. Thank you.
The focus is right there.
Okay, good. Thank you. But at any rate, I will happily announce that I think there was, in my mind's eye, there was a lot less of that screaming. The questions were strong and powerful from the antis. They were very to the point. Sometimes they spoke about things which we, in fact, know, and I think all America really, in fact, knows, are lies. Talking about, you know, killing grandma and
death panels
and these other things which are not true at all, but they keep getting brought up. But at least they were brought up in a little bit more reasoned tone, if not subject matter. At any rate, yeah, on Wednesday and Thursday morning, Chris Murphy held a couple of sessions in the Danbury Green, and there were some concerns from some of the people that it was hard to hear the questions, partly because people were yelling out, "It's hard to hear the questions." So they were too busy yelling to stop and to lean forward and listen to hear the questions. And some of them may not have even wanted to hear the questions.
Sure.
But that was one of the concerns that that folks on the anti-side.
How did Chris handle himself?
Very well. He was very clear. He was very firm about the fact that we need to get health care costs down.
Okay.
That there are many things available to us, but that needs to be one of the key goals, and that's where competition comes in.
Is he for a public option?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Simply because that has been the best idea put forward in terms of getting costs down. Insurance costs are out of control.
Right.
And this is because we don't have capitalism involved in our healthcare market now.
Ironically.
It does seem odd, though, doesn't it, that, you know, we live in a capitalist country, but so many facets of our economy, and healthcare being one of them. Now, healthcare doesn't really deliver anything. All they do is, it's a layer of bureaucracy. So when we talk about bureaucrats in terms of healthcare, the healthcare system, the HMOs, that's really all they are bureaucrats. They act as a go-between
between the provider,
a doctor and a hospital,
and a caregiver,
and the patient. That's all they do, and they pay the bills, or in many cases, find any way humanly possible to not pay the bills.
Yeah. I understand you also went to Norwalk, and I understand that there was about 70% were for public option, strong health care reform,
that's
and 30% were against it, and very vocal, as I understand.
That's a fair estimate, and there were some scuffles, some verbal scuffles outside and inside also, because what happened was we were generally there first, but we did, in fact, we left seats open, scattered seats open amongst us. So some of the antis came in, and there was a very broad mix right within each section of people that were in favor of health care reform and people that were against health care reform. There were discussions that went on. I had a long, and I think a pretty fruitful discussion with a husband and wife that were behind me. The wife didn't have much to say. She let the husband do the talking. But you know how men can agree or disagree without killing each other.
Without rancor.
Without rancor. So we got our points across to each other. We had a good conversation. He took offense at some of the things I said. I took offense at some of the things he said. But again, we understood that this is because it's a very emotional situation.
One of the things that I don't know whether the so-called crazies or diehards who talk about the fact,
better.
Okay, do they not want any kind of change as far as health care reform? I mean, are they against everything and they want to leave the status quo alone? Are there some of those? It's
safer to say that they're afraid of any change. That they're really, so much has happened in the last year. People, particularly people that felt comfortable with a nice collegiate kind of president that they had, who sort of laid back and smiled and let some other folks run the government. And the Congress showed up about 50 days out of the entire year for the first 6 years of the Bush administration. The last 2 years, the Democrats elevated that in terms of days in session, but they ran into a lot of disagreements with President Bush, who vetoed quite a few bills. that the Democrats put forward. Now we've got...
No, we can't afford, especially with the economic crisis, we can't afford to have this laissez-faire anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. It's really not even capitalism. And it's just, as you mentioned, it's very ironic that here we are capitalists who are being called, along with our president, are being called socialists, communists, Marxists.
Nazis.
Yeah, Nazis, when in fact...
For wanting to re-inject competition.
For wanting to put a good, honest, capitalist competition back into the system.
Did anybody talk about death panels in Norwalk? Or
there was a question about that, and Representative Himes, who's a representative in the 4th Congressional District, basically said, it's not in there. Mm-hmm. He would not take a question about something that was not truthful, that wasn't a sincere question, because it involved something which, in fact, let's call it a lie, because it's a lie. Mm-hmm. He talked about being for a public option because of the explosion in health care costs over the last couple of decades, particularly recently, where it's out of control at 16% of our gross domestic product. If it mushrooms any further, we're going to be out.
To the people, Dave, on healthcare. Part of the reason, it's not all darkness with healthcare. Part of the reason that healthcare prices have gone up so much has been due to advances in technology.
Absolutely.
Advances in what they can do.
Agreed.
Yes.
That's part of the big reason why we got into this mess.
Agreed.
However, and it's a daunting thing to deal with, but it can be dealt with. As we said in last week's show, it's been dealt with very effectively in other countries,
Yes.
which are not even remotely socialist.
Agreed.
Right? Taiwan, for instance. Okay.
So, other than the death panels, and what did Jim Himes or Chris Murphy talk about specifically, and the public option?
Mostly they spoke about cost containment.
Okay.
Creating a situation of some kind to force HMOs to either lower their costs, their profits to a reasonable level, or price themselves out of the market. And what's wrong with a little good competition?
No, absolutely.
And also for the viewers, when we back up, Dave, why is it that the top insurance companies, I mean, I think 80% of the market might be controlled by as few as 5 of them?
Very few.
Very few.
Most states don't have a lot of competition. There may be 1 or 2 companies that deal in that state, and that's the problem. That's one of the major problems.
Doesn't sound like capitalism to me.
It does not.
And folks, these are the same people who brought you the recent recession. These insurance companies are tied up in the financial groupings that cause this problem. And Dave, why don't you explain, so people want to understand, why is it? What are the political connections between the top players like Anthem and United and Washington? Why are they so entrenched? Why is that?
Well, both Representative Himes and Representative Murphy reminded people, those that were willing to be reminded, that at one time we had Blue Cross and Blue Shield, which was a not-for-profit part of the healthcare equation, which became ultimately a for-profit group. They became for-profit groups in conjunction with hospitals, which are increasingly for-profit rather than not-for-profit. And this, again, has forced prices up without any type of controls to keep them in line.
Did you all mention last week that in the countries that do have a good healthcare system, universal healthcare system, or public option, that one of the first things they did legislatively and legally was to make it more difficult for insurance companies. In fact, this is almost a prerequisite to make it more difficult for insurance companies to make profit off primary care.
They capped it, and we talked about that. I believe we talked about it last week as a cap.
That's a fair step to take, I think, in America. My personal opinion is that healthcare should not be at all for profit. That it doesn't. It's like police protection, it's like fire protection, should not be for profit. It's a God-given, if you will, it's a right which all Americans should have equal access to and have good access to
clearly,
good
with
healthcare.
the amount of bankruptcies coming because people get sick and they can't afford it, and the bankruptcy ensues, is just phenomenal, and it's increasing every year. And what do they talk about? 15,000 people every day or every week lose their health insurance because of the rising costs.
Well, this is really what people are afraid of, I think.
Untenable.
They may not understand it.
We've been talking in abstract terms, but
right.
I can tell you, I come in daily with horror stories. There's stories about people getting caught in this vice of getting sick or ill, or having a relative get sick or ill, and not having insurance. I mean, it's a nightmare beyond description.
Yeah.
You can't pay your mortgage, you can lose your house, and even if that happens, you may not be off the hook, because they could
Right.
still come after you. Your credit's going to be shot.
Right.
And this is real life. I mean, we've been talking abstractly, but people are really suffering.
One of the things we did at the Danbury, you want to call it vigil or demonstration, was to present a number of cases, actual cases of healthcare horror stories. I read one from a woman in California, and then there were a few of the people right there at the vigil who attended the vigil who had their own horror stories, and they were broadcast as well or talked about as well. So you're right. It's all throughout this country.
I find it hard to believe that anyone who was demonstrating against the bill had been victimized by not having insurance and being sick.
Yeah, yeah.
You would think that, but I still
Maybe
find
not.
that I still find that a little bit difficult to believe. And in fact, I feel like we're on both sides, two sides of an issue, and at the same time, we really should be on the same side because we really have the same fears and the same concerns. Runaway health costs, lack of competition.
And I think a big part of this is getting the two sides. I think a lot of the fear, as it's a big complex issue, a big technical issue, and it's even for people like us that are interested in following it, it's hard for us to actually understand exactly what's going on, the ins and outs. And if we can explain that.
Well, there is not a bill. That's one of the problems, I think, and one of the issues that people talk about. Like Himes for a long time, he happens to be my representative, the 4th, has talked, is that he does not have a bill that he can really say I'm pro or against. He knows what he's for, but doesn't have a bill, and that's one of the things.
But they've
Obama,
all seen the framework.
The framework is there.
And I trust that all our representatives and most American citizens have enough time on their hands to read 1,017 pages, which is the principal draft of the outline of the bill.
So maybe at the rest of the show we can try to address a few of the even though there's not a bill, there's a few things that are certain that might be in the bill or the proposed bill and are causing a lot of unnecessary anxiety and fear. Maybe we can address that after we go to the PSA.
Yes, we're going to the PSA, and we'll be back in a minute. And this is Progressive Soup, and we're talking about health care.
It completely turned my life around, gave me back the independence and the freedom that I've needed.
The key word there is independence.
Guide dogs are an important part of life for many blind people, and the law permits them everywhere that's open to the public.
In the last 50 years, I've had 6 guide dogs, all from the Guide Dog Foundation.
She's my best friend, and it's because she's always there for me 110% of the time.
The Guide Dog Foundation for the Blind has been providing guide dogs to blind people free of charge for more than half a century.
It gives me the confidence to go try things and to go do things that I probably wouldn't ordinarily do.
Now I go where I want and I do what I want.
People have to understand that the dog is working, and when they want to try to pet the dog, it breaks her routine.
A blind person and a guide dog are a team, working for independence.
And so put the two of us together, and we're invincible.
To learn more, call the Guide Dog Foundation for the Blind, 1-800-548-4337.
Welcome back to Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. We have James Root and Mike Toda with us, and thank you very much for the guide dog commercial. We have about a 1,017-page bill that a lot of people are complaining about that nobody's read. Well, Chris Murphy's read it because he's been in the process. He's been in the group.
This is the Senate. This is the Senate bill.
No, this is the.
Because the Senate bill would be Chris Dodd.
No, we're talking about Chris Murphy.
I'm sorry. Okay, so we're talking now about the House bill.
They're both long, but
they're both long.
Yes.
1,017 pages. But my gosh, aren't we all as Americans intelligent enough and have enough time to read 1,017 pages? Is that, 7 or 8 hours of reading maybe? And read it and digest it instead of screaming about how nobody's read it? It's
very simple to point the finger and say what untruths are in it without reading the bill. And clearly a lot of people have done that. From, I don't need to mention names about death panels and all these other ridiculous accusations that are no lies. Thank you, David. But anyway, let's talk about positives of what is in the bill.
Right. And let me discuss the bill. A lot of these fears also are not necessarily people trying to make trouble. They may sincerely not understand it. I think it can be the case in a lot of cases.
And clearly there are people who are fomenting this fear. Okay, but
that's true too.
Speak
exploiting the fear. Exploiting
absolutely
the fear.
Exploiting it. You're right.
Now, you and David last week talked about it's a massive bill, and a lot of it deals with other than the public option, but to the average person, the public option might be the most important feature, an understandable feature, and I think it offers a lot to people if they stop and listen. there's probably, I'd say 3 main facets. I mean, one fact, I know a lot of people personally are chained to their jobs that they hate, jobs that are driving them crazy.
You wouldn't be one, would you?
Possibly. And, okay. Lost my
portability is another one.
Right.
And
okay.
You can't be discriminated. You can't be discriminated on for a previous health condition, what have you. If you had a hanging toenail or something like that, your cancer, your bout with cancer can't be cut off because of that silly little thing that they found in your past history.
Yeah. In this economy, if you need to do a job search, this will make it easier for you to do its portability.
Absolutely.
And also, as Mike said, another horror story is people who develop a serious illness that needs some expensive treatment, and you can't get it because the insurance companies still retain the option, a lot of their contracts, to cancel your insurance. So imagine getting a certain special kind of cancer and not being covered. Pretty unpleasant, right?
It absolutely is.
I can't believe that human beings, that Americans, are loath to taking care of someone else who has a serious illness, that would cast them aside and say, it's okay for health insurance, for the HMOs to cut them off because they've reached a dollar figure that they're only allowed up to, or if they lose their job, they can't get health care because of that pre-existing condition. That doesn't sound humane, and it doesn't sound American.
It doesn't. What's amazing about it to me is the fact is that we have veterans program, health program. We have the United States senators and congressmen. We have all of Medicare. They're all on, if you want to call it, socialized medicine.
It's all single payer. Yeah, socialized
I thank
medicine.
you, as being somebody from Medicare, I thank you two guys for paying into the system like I paid in for all these years. This is a system that works.
So we can really we can view the proposed bill as just an extension of what's already there.
Absolutely.
Rather than something from outer space.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
Now the only complaint I'm still hearing about Medicare, for example, is that it's going broke, which is not exactly true. It's a twisting of the facts. But if the reason why it's not getting enough money is because Congress, in its infinite wisdom, back during Republican administrations, put a cap on the amount of income that could be taxed for Social Security and for Medicare. I think it's $102,000.
Something like that.
Why would anybody that makes $1 million a year object to being taxed for that additional money, that additional income, for going to something that would keep something as important as Medicare going and solvent forever?
David, that's a whole other subject about who would like to be taxed and who won't be taxed. But there are other things. Obviously, that new add-on to Medicare, when the government now no longer can go after the drug companies to get the lowest price. Their hands are tied. There's the donut hole. There's a whole bunch of bad things that have been written into that bill that have tied the hands of government to try to reduce the costs of Medicare.
This is the bill from 2003.
That's right.
It was passed through a Republican Congress and signed by a Republican president.
In the middle of the night.
And they did it with a 1-vote margin.
And I've heard that
there was no 60 votes on that one.
And it was held over for hours until they finally got that last vote.
The one from Walter Jones from North Carolina, who Dan was going to vote against it, and somehow or other his arm got twisted enough so that he voted for it.
And folks, I mean, that bill, I've heard, over the long term will cost as much as the current one.
Absolutely.
$1 trillion over 10 years. Absolutely.
And it's a boondoggle for the health care companies, because two things. It also did the medical advantage. And the medical advantage is nothing other than a giveaway of billions of dollars to the health insurance companies every year for nothing. I mean, what I get in Medicare, I don't need an Advantage plan. If I wanted to go to an Advantage plan, I should, or extra stuff beyond Medicare, I pay for it. I do. I have our plan, which tacks on to Medicare, and I pay for my drugs and throughout, but that's a separate thing. I don't have to have an Advantage plan, which the government has to pay for.
Didn't they try to force seniors to go into that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Doesn't sound like choice to me.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. It is ironic. So there's a lot of things that we are for as far as this health care discussion, and there are a lot of things that we're against for this health care discussion. What is really needed in this country is some rational decisions or rational discussions about what's good and what's bad for this country. And James, you put it very, and David yourself, is that, hey, why are people against it? Okay? It's fear. It's a fear of the unknown. It's fear of crazies trying to tell them that all of this is going to be something that is going to create death panels or
And
crazy kinds of stuff?
You know, I understand Americans are about independence. It's an important part of the country, and doing your own thing and lifting yourself up by your bootstraps. And that's an important psychology, and it persists to this day, and it has some good effects. But let me say, as we all know, we're not living, unfortunately, or fortunately, in the 18th century anymore. A lot of these ideals and attitudes, we don't have to put them away, but we just can't apply them in every area. It just doesn't work. And healthcare is one. You know, I would like to be able to get on by my own and be Davy Crockett and just, you know, fend for myself. But, you know, half my family has serious cancer, so I know it's just, you know, that more than, as much as anything else showed me that
you need health care.
You need health insurance.
Yeah, it's imperative, that's for sure. And you said such a truism before, is that a lot of people get a job, stay with a job that they may dislike intensely, or find a job, and the bottom line is, will they have health care, or will they get health care, or not lose health care? And that's not competition. No. That is not competition. That is not promoting.
It's not. And again, back to not to beat the subject again and again and again. But this is what it comes down to. Cost containment and competition. HMOs are not providing that. They don't compete against one another. It's capitalism. It's not even capitalism, but if it were capitalism, it'd be capitalism run amok.
Right. And this proposed bill also, because of the political influence of the big insurance companies, let me just explain. This is already an extremely watered-down version of what we should have. This is still, the public option in the current bill is still
not single payer.
Not single payer, and it's very kind to the existing insurance companies. They're going to be okay, more than okay.
Absolutely.
And we have about, I think, Dave, I'm sorry, we have about 1 minute left. And you guys, I want to make one final point on this. We've been talking about very rational monetary terms, so let's get back to morality and ethics, okay?
Yes, please do.
On the ground. I think the way they set up the bill, it probably should not cost much in the long run. But let's hypothetically, let's say it did. But probably won't. It won't, I don't think. But I think it may be academic, and that the public option of some sort, it's a moral thing to do. It's what we should be doing. It's a question, imperative, that stands outside of money.
The morality issue has been lost in all of this furor and all of this hyper craziness. Okay, you're absolutely right. That is what government is all about. That is what the Christian Judeo-Christian ethic is all about. Whether you're religious or not religious, is that, hey, you're looking out for your fellow man. I mean.
And I think people across the political spectrum can agree with what we're saying.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. If we could just clear away the lies and get down to the what's really involved here, what the truths are, I think we'll find broad support.
And what is best for the country.
And this is doable, folks. This bill is designed by people to make it marketable, and it's going to be gradual, and it's very doable.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up there, and this is Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. James Root and Mike Toto have been with me, having a roundtable discussion about the health care package, the health care proposal, and moving forward as a country together. Thank you very much. Good evening.